Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Alex Hoffman. I'm with the Equipment Dealers Association. I'm very excited to introduce Susan Rue from Elavon, who will be presenting for us today. Susan is a solutions consultant for security solutions and implementation with Elavon. Elavon's been in business since 1991 and has been working with EDA since the early 2000s. They are expert when it comes to what dealerships should be doing to protect cardholder data, and we're so glad to have them here today to share that information with you. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. First, we encourage you to ask questions today. There's a Q&A box on your screen. Just click that, type in your question, and we will answer it aloud for the group at the end of the webinar, but we will not share your name or information when we read your question. Second, a recording of today's webinar and a copy of the slides will be emailed to you following the presentation. Please feel free to share those with others in your business. And lastly, please just remember that this and other webinars are free services of EDA for our members, and if you have any questions about EDA or our member benefits, please do not hesitate to contact our office. That's all for me for a little while. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Susan.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Great. I'm glad to be here. I get excited when folks want to talk about protecting their payments because it's a hot topic. You know, in the past, the responsibilities around accepting cards were reasonably simple, if we think about it. I've been in the industry for a little over 25 years, and you know, when you started out with cards, you get an approval, and the costs were pretty simple to understand. There was a simple interchange matrix, chargebacks. You could usually negotiate those, and then the security requirements. They just barely even existed when we first started taking card payments. You occasionally would have to scoop somebody's card because you couldn't get it authorized, and today everything goes much further than that in the card business. So how do we understand payments well enough to protect our business? And sorry about that, I had a little trouble with the transition. So protect our business, and what do we do next? So this is the simple cycle, right? You get the authorization at the beginning, you get settlement, you send a settlement, and then the best part, you get paid. And this is the standard credit card life cycle that now has to be scrutinized for our security purposes, cost purposes, everything that you do so that you can manage and even mitigate your cost of accepting card payments. So anybody that's accepting credit cards today understands that there's multiple costs that go into accepting one credit card payment from your customers. You have the assessment, you have the authorization, you have whatever processor fees you need to pay, and you have interchange. Now, the cost of accepting card payments is primarily driven by interchange. So when you settle your transactions each day, I don't know if you know this, but your merchant processor routes them to the respective card associations or debit associations, so your Visa and MasterCard and American Express. And those are the networks that establish your rules and manage the interchange, and then they charge the fees to offset their costs. Interchange fees are usually paid at the time the transaction is completed, and if you don't process according to the rules, in addition to all of this, you might pay fines. And then you have your other fees, which come in that nice little yellow box that shows on the screen, your chargeback fees, your retrieval fees, your PCI compliance fees, or worse, PCI non-compliance. And I'm hoping everyone that's on the phone today is PCI compliant. That's your first step when you're looking at securing payments and securing your environment from the threats today. So the other potential transaction costs, I mentioned chargebacks. So that's a transaction that's disputed by your customer. And payment fraud, which is the unauthorized, I won't read the slide to you, but it's really, you don't have an authorized user presenting the card. And EMV technology has drastically reduced but the cost associated with both of these categories. So if you're using EMV today, great. And if you're not, we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the benefits are so that you can evaluate that type of project for your business. One of the other costs that I think is particularly relevant to this industry is the large ticket interchange. Now, most of you are probably familiar with this, but all of these card brands, the Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and even American Express, they offer some interchange expense reductions if you're processing a specific or a particularly high average transaction in a business-to-business capacity. So in talking to Alex and looking at some of the folks that plan to attend the webinar, I think this is particularly applicable in your business. And you can talk to your merchant processor about their large ticket interchange program if you haven't done that already, and look at how you can lower that interchange cost. Also reduce your chargeback risk by passing level 3 data. This is additional data that can be attached to the transaction to give the issuer, who ultimately is approving your transaction, a little more data around that transaction to hopefully approve more transactions. I know that Elavon has a program for this, and I know that many other processors out in the industry have a program for this. So whoever you're processing with today, talk to them about their large ticket interchange program, as well as the level 3 data program, and whether or not that can help lower some of your processing costs. So the cost of fraud. The cost of fraud is one of those that is hardest to mitigate until you actually do implement a security program. In 2017, just as it says here on the slide, the U.S. merchants reported that for every $1 of fraud, it costs them anywhere from $2.50 to almost $3 to manage that fraud. So the costs of fraud that are clearly rising. I'm sure you've seen it in the news many times. And even companies that do have a program in place to attempt to combat fraudsters, prevent hacks, prevent the thieves, the threat actors, they'll spend thousands of dollars, and the thieves still get in. So what you're looking for is, how do you mitigate that cost of fraud, and how do you mitigate the cost of fighting these threat actors? I don't think there's probably anyone on the phone that hasn't heard one of these terms, especially the phishing, right? If you're running a business and you've got employees on the payroll, you've heard of phishing, and you've probably warned your employees about phishing. Phishing is probably the threat actor's favorite way to enter your business today. So that's why when you're filling out your PCI audit, you need to understand what third parties come into your system, how do they enter your system. I think we all know by now that it was the Target breach was due to a phishing scam that was conducted under the name of their HVAC provider. So the thieves and criminals are getting very clever. There's actually even schools set up in overseas in Europe and some of the countries you can think of that teach people how to hack into your business and steal valuable data. So the data security problem, one of my favorite seminars that I attend on a regular basis is one that's put together by the FBI and their technology group that spends time, I think you probably see the commercial, sitting behind monitors and computers and servers, monitoring, looking for these threat actors, the threats, and the criminals. And so the comment by Robert Mueller here, kind of ironic that we bring that up today, but there are only 2 types of companies that have been hacked and those that will be, and that's still true. 80% of the businesses that have been hacked in the last year don't even know yet that they've been hacked, that they've had some type of compromise. It takes a long time to uncover a breach. And if you're only doing your PCI audit once a year and you're not thinking about security the rest of the year, it may be your next PCI audit when you uncover the fact that you've been breached. And the number of breaches continue to rise. Even with the increased investment in security, in 2018, there were 5 mega breaches. And I think we've all heard about the largest one, the 5.7 billion records that Equifax had breached. I have been saying this for a little over a year now, but I'll say it again, that if you haven't checked to see if you're one of the folks breached in the Equifax breach, I highly suggest that you do that like immediately after this webinar. I was breached with that. I had records that were exposed in that breach, yet my husband did not. So it's very individual, and you want to make sure you check on that. So what is the industry doing about this, and what are other businesses doing about it? The attacks on small businesses have been increasing and rising, and as an industry, the card processors and acquirers such as Elavon have been working hard to increase the security that we put around payments, even if it's coming from a terminal that's not integrated into your system. So we recognize that the cost of a breach to a small business can put them out of business, period, that can end business for them. So we do spend a lot of time on small businesses as well as large businesses. So we work with enterprise and national clients, and your processors quite often offer a subject matter expert like myself that can consult, help you get started, but do it sooner rather than later, because as you can see here, the costs only rise for a breach, and you don't want to be the next one paying for a breach or going out of business because of a breach. The consequences, I think we're all pretty familiar with the consequences. We put reputational damage right up front, especially with the type of business that you're in, doing a lot of business-to-business transactions, large transactions. Your customers and the cardholders are going to want to have confidence that you are taking their personal or their private information, that confidential information, seriously. The litigation, I know we all know it's a very litigious society these days. And then just all the remediation that you need to do to recover from that breach. And I don't think I even mentioned on this slide that there are fines. So you get fined by Visa or MasterCard or American Express. MasterCard goes so far as to dictate how you will remediate the breach. And they don't necessarily consider how much it would cost you to do that. So what do we do in today's environment? When we're accepting payments, every business is accepting payments via different mechanisms. So again, based on the backgrounds and some of the folks that signed in for this webinar, you're more likely to have multiple points at which you're accepting payments. And as you do business with other merchants, I think you've probably noticed now that they also have multiple points where they accept payments and do business. And that's because we as consumers demand it. We demand flexibility, immediacy, we demand accessibility. So what do we do in the card not present business? So when you are actually going to see the card, how do you mitigate fraud in that environment? Well, understanding what some of the causes are that allow the fraudsters in is a good start. So if you're using low Wi-Fi security, so you're giving your guests or your customers access to the network when they're on your property, but you use low Wi-Fi security, you could be opening you could be opening your own network to having your payments exposed and stolen. Malware infiltration. I think we all know what malware is. Some of the malware that we've encountered recently is the ransomware, for example, where someone takes over your computer and until you either pay them or just get used to not having that computer anymore, your data is now not only compromised, but it's locked and you're not able to get into it. And then cardholder identity theft and chargebacks. How do you know the person that you're doing business with? How do you know that you're getting card data from the same person you're talking to and that this is the person who's entitled to use that card? And then you have your card present security and fraud situations. So the improper credentials and data management, I can't emphasize enough adopting a culture of security throughout your business so that your employees are part of your security solution. So don't add security on later. Every time you incorporate a new process, procedure, program, application, anything in your business, make sure that you're adopting security with that as it enters your business. Avoiding downloading unknown attachments. I'm sure everybody's heard about that. And then again, still the cardholder identity theft and chargeback. EMV is a very good start to identifying that you have the right person presenting the card at your point of sale. So how do we protect ourselves in all of these environments and mitigate fraud at the best possible level? Well, as much as I hesitate to bring up PCI and DSS, and I've already done that once or twice, PCI is actually your foundation. That's where you start when you want to mitigate the any what do I say, gaps in your security. So we know that Visa, MasterCard, all those card brands, that they require PCI. We know it can be expensive. We know it can be painful, but it is a good foundation, and it is the best place to start when you're looking at how to secure your environment. Then there's the payment security layers at the point at which you're accepting payments. You have EMV. So if you're working in a card present environment, you can fight fraud right at your point of sale by starting with EMV. And then you have to think beyond EMV. So we know that EMV will validate that the card and the cardholder belong together, but we also know that it doesn't protect you against card not present transactions, and it doesn't prevent a data breach. So PCI or EMV, they don't prevent a data breach. So what do you do if you're not able to prevent a data breach? Well, encrypt the data. So as soon as the PAN data, that card data, enters your system, encrypt it. This is your number one and your best defense against having that sensitive data exposed. Because once the data is encrypted, your provider, your solution provider, will set up a solution so that you don't have the keys to decrypt it, so the thieves can't find a way to decrypt that data by just compromising your system. So that's number one. Make sure that your card acceptance solution encrypts the data as soon as it enters the device where you're accepting a card. And then after encryption, what else do you do? Because encryption protects your data in transit. Protecting the data, then take it one step further, protect it when it's at rest with a token. And a token is really just a fancy way of saying, we've given you a substitute value that you can use if you need to issue a refund or a credit or additional transactions, recurring transactions. But because this token is a value that we've given to you, it can't be used anywhere else. So it can't be used to create an e-commerce transaction with another merchant, or it can't be used to create a card, a fake plastic card to create a sale at another merchant location. So it's a way of protecting that data at rest, the data that you might need for additional transactions with that customer. So tokenization is a third layer. I should have put 4 layers up here, starting with PCI, and then you add EMV for card present, you have encryption for card present. Tokenization is good for both card present and card not present. And card not present is where the fraud has been going. I think we all know that. So where do you start? Okay, so you don't have a security program in place yet, and that's still true. I know it's been that EMV came about in 2015. It wasn't mandated, but it was that you were certainly incentivized because of the liability shift that came with EMV. So where do you start if you haven't done anything yet? Depending on how vulnerable you feel your business is, and what your tolerance for risk is, You may even want to start with a full cybersecurity overview and review, or you may hire someone in the PCI assessment support business just to do a basic security assessment, help you identify your vulnerabilities and your gaps, and then start looking for a security solution that fits your business. There are a wide variety of solutions out in the market today that will do all of the things that we've talked about for card present transactions, and we'll talk about card not present in a moment, but they offer EMV and encryption and tokenization. They offer liability insurance in the event that you are actually breached, or that you have a malware intrusion and you may have been exposed. Your card data what's in your system may have been exposed. And then preparing your business. If I was going to call out the 2 out of those 3 bullet points, the budgeting is probably one of those that you need to start earlier rather than later, and training. While you can inform your guests, or your customers, most of them have probably seen EMV by now, but train your staff not to bypass prompts. Don't let somebody talk you out of making them enter their PIN if they have a PIN number associated with their card, things like that. So, because that's one of your other vulnerability points. So, common mistakes of the PCI audit. I put this up here because the most common mistake I see customers make is not using the resources that their own processor provides. Again, I hate to keep harping on that, but your processor or acquirer, it's highly likely that they have tools, subject matter experts, systems, and programs to assist you in avoiding these common mistakes made with PCI audits, as well as getting through the audit, and maybe even passing the audit a couple of years in a row so that you can be exempt the 3rd year, for example. So there's a lot of programs out there. Ask more questions and engage your processor or your acquirer, and see what tools they have available. So e-commerce, or card not present transactions. This is a growing segment, obviously, of card processing, and it's also a growing segment of where the fraud is taking place. The fraud in the web transactions is very rapidly reaching a point at which it would be double what we saw in 2015 prior to the advent of EMV. Double. So we're talking from millions into billions as far as losses from card not present fraud. So, and I have on the screen here, and you'll get a copy of this presentation. These are some of the suggested fraud prevention filters that many e-commerce providers offer. I've seen them offered in multiple solutions, and sometimes folks don't use them just because they don't realize they exist. Maybe your e-commerce provider doesn't have this entire list, but see what they do have on their list and talk to their subject matter expert and get some suggestions. We had a very interesting case study, and we have multiple case studies every year with our customers. And this is a particularly interesting one where we were alerted to a sudden spike in chargebacks that was resulting in the loss of tens of thousands of dollars. And upon further investigation, we found that there was one single IP address that was submitting multiple transactions, fraudulent transactions. They had a correct zip code, but they had an incorrect address. And I don't know if all of you know what that means, but that means that the CVV, or not the CVV2 value, excuse me, but the AVS, the address verification service, was not being used properly, because if you've got the right zip code but incorrect address, that should have set off a flag. So one of our experts evaluated the situation, and they put some of those filters you saw on the previous screen into place, especially like an IP address blacklist, obviously, since we know that was a problem. and a couple of other velocity filters in place. And since then, they saw a 50% reduction in chargebacks within 60 days, because we all know it takes time for chargebacks to cycle through, and they're down to 10% of the chargebacks that they had before this fraud occurred. So now they're down to identifying the card and the consumer more specifically. And there are tools coming out for that as well. You may have heard of 3D Secure and some of the secure customer authentication rules going into effect in Europe later this year. So one of the other tools that's out there that I realized after I spoke to some equipment dealers last year, they didn't know really existed, was a billing and invoicing tool. Now, that sounds pretty simple, but if you work with your e-commerce provider or your processor and get a billing and invoicing tool so that you can create your bill, you can present it to your customer, but when they pay for that bill with a credit card, they're actually taken to a page, a hosted page, that your processor or your partner, your e-commerce partner, provides, so that the card data is never actually entered on your system. So what's the best way to keep a hacker from getting the card data? Don't even make it available. It's not even on your system. It's not encrypted, it's not tokenized, it doesn't exist. And so some of you are thinking, well, then how do I do recurring payments? You can set this up so that you get a token back, but if it's truly a one-time payment and you're really not interested in creating a database and explaining to your QSA at PCI audit that those are really tokens, not cards, you can make it so that the cards never even touch your system. So it's a pretty slick way to get the card data off your system and away from any exposure from a security perspective. So you have your customer and card present environment. You want to eliminate, if you can, altogether, eliminate storing cardholder data, or seek a solution to find a way to store it securely. When you open your project, if you haven't done this yet, for EMV and encryption, seek a solution that also helps you future-proof your payment acceptance model. So maybe it's mobile and contactless ready, or maybe there's something else like the billing and invoicing tool that makes more sense for your business. Obviously, always reduce your PCI exposure. And if you get with the right solution provider, they can also help you reduce your PCI scope. That's big. If you're a tier 4 merchant filling out, 300 questions on your annual questionnaire, with the right solution and PCI validated point-to-point encryption solution, you might be able to reduce that down to 30 to 50 questions. And just as much as you can, reduce complexity. Again, shop your solution to make sure that it fits your business and that they can keep you current. We use remote updates on our solution so that we can update our customers' devices, PIN pads that are in the field for compliance changes, or just industry changes, something that needs to be changed because your business needs a new prompt or needs to remove a configuration, something to that effect. So there are a lot of solutions out there. And the solution that's right for your business is really going to vary. Again, as a consumer, you've seen all types of solutions. So you see standalone terminals. You see a device that's not really hooked into the merchant's point of sale system. They just accept the payments, and then you reconcile that off to the side. And that's a very good solution, and those are very solid, and probably your easiest solution, not only to implement, but to address on a PCI audit. Fully integrated and semi-integrated require partnership with your vendor partner. So whoever's providing your point of sale application, for example, that should be a shared solution that you're working on with them. They may already be certified to several solutions. So that gives you a good place to start when you talk to that point of sale vendor. Say, who do you work with that provides EMV and tokenization and encryption? And that way you can start shopping with something that's already working and integrated to your point of sale system. this is just an example of the transaction flow in with a security integration. You've got the point of sale talking to your terminal, which happens today with or without EMV, but that terminal now is equipped with a tamper-resistant secure module, plus your encryption tools, and sending your transaction to a gateway or the next step in your processor. And then from there, it goes into your payment network. And the reason I show you this flow is you want to make sure that as you evaluate solution providers, you understand the touch points for all of your transactions, what your responsibility will be in securing the payment. Will the payments at any time, for instance, between the gateway and the payment network, will those payments be unencrypted? What's being done to secure that transmission? And you want to understand the full payment life cycle, because you're responsible for that card data from the point at which you accept the card until the issuer approves or declines it. So you never want it in the clear if at all possible. So this just explains some of the touch points that you look for and where you want to make sure that the card data is protected. And again, which solution fits your business? The standalone terminals are the easiest, but you've got to do some dual reconciliation. The fully integrated and semi-integrated require a little more planning and development upfront, but it can be a significantly simpler solution to use in the long run from a maintenance and ownership perspective. So it's time to take action. It's time to do something. EMV, if you don't have EMV, implement EMV. I can't emphasize that enough. Right now, while the card associations are not necessarily, they're still just offering incentive and the liability shift, if you are breached right now, based on the pattern, the history that we've seen so far, these Visa, MasterCard, all these card associations, they will come back and mandate a solution that you need to implement. And I don't know about you, but I like to make my choice up front, not have somebody else make it for me. So find an EMV solution. And then you get once you've found the right solution, you get a lot of these advantages that I've already talked about on the right-hand side. You not only reduce your in-person fraud and mitigate your risk for having data exposed, but you pay a lot fewer fees that we talked about earlier, like the PCI non-compliance fee or more chargebacks, or even just a solution that makes sure that you're processing by the rules and you don't get fined for those types of situations. So I feel like I did a lot of talking, Alex. That seems like a lot of information all at once, and I wasn't monitoring questions, so I thought maybe you could help me out with some of the questions that we may have from the audience.
Sure, a ton of information, great information, kind of scary information sometimes. But yeah, one question that did pop up is, are there any fines or other, for if you don't implement a security system like an EMV?
There aren't yet for those of us that are accepting payments in the U.S. If Visa and MasterCard follow the pattern that they did in Canada, they started off the same way. So they offered EMV in Canada, and they offered the liability shift for implementing EMV. And now there are actually fees, not fines necessarily, but fees associated with not implementing EMV. So you'll pay a higher interchange rate for not having EMV. So if they follow that pattern, that would be coming. I can't tell you that I've definitely seen it, but yeah, I imagine it's going to be the standard, right? Visa offers the carrot first and then comes back with the stick. So not yet, and not unless you're breached. If you're breached, then the whole story changes.
Okay. So a second question that popped up, what recourse do I have in the event of a chargeback?
So I'm guessing here we're talking about two different you're in two different places at the moment. So if you haven't implemented EMV and you get a chargeback for unauthorized user, you have absolutely no recourse. There is nothing you can do. I had customers come to me and they've got a photo of the person's driver's license, which of course you should not do, but they'll have that. And they'll have that person on camera making the transaction. And it just doesn't matter. If you don't have EMV implemented, you have no recourse on that chargeback. The other problem with that is with the advent of EMV, we saw a greater spike in, and I hate to call it friendly fraud, because it's not very friendly, but you have people that are savvy enough to know that if you're not taking that card using an EMV reader, that they can charge it back and there's no questions asked and you have no recourse. So without EMV, you have very little recourse. Now with EMV, you have more recourse. Now, some of the chargeback rules, there's still, in theory, there's still no dispute. But again, if you go back to your processor, most of them have a chargeback assistance program where they can help you work the chargeback and find a way to make sure that the issuers are sending them for the right reason code and just do their best to filter out anything that you should not be seeing because you do have EMV implemented. I don't know if that was helpful. I hope so.
I have a question of my own just from listening. You mentioned the three different kinds of solutions, the fully integrated, the standalone, and then the partially integrated. How would a business owner, how do you choose which is right for your business? What should you be thinking about when you're making those decisions?
So the customers that I work with, they usually start with whether or not they have a point of sale system that they're running all of their transactions through. So maybe you have the XYZ point of sale system installed on a couple of workstations or a couple of computers, laptops, and you want to know if you can attach a terminal to your computer and take your EMV transactions that way. And so you start by calling XYZ point of sale system and say, are you prepared for EMV? Who are you working with to provide an EMV solution? And who would I contact that has that solution so they can give me some options, some pricing, and outline what the project would look like for me. So it can be very simple. My own company has everything from a plug and play, where we provide what's called a software developer's kit, and your point of sale provider uses that developer's kit to plug in a couple of drivers and make sure that they're gathering all the information, and then you literally plug in the computer and the terminal, and you go. And then I have the fully integrated or the big box systems that you've got multiple locations and thousands of devices you'd have to buy, and you want to get it right the first time. And at which time we build a round table essentially of everyone that would touch the solution delivery. So the point of sale vendor, the terminal vendor, our own subject matter experts with the solution, and we build a round table and design a program that fits that specific business need. So it really it starts with how you want to accept payments. I know everybody here's probably seen that little square, the dongle on the phone, and everybody thinks that's the way to go. That's the easiest way to take payments. It sounds good until you start talking about security and running transactions through somebody's personal phone over an open internet. I could come up with a lot of reasons to take a few more minutes, hesitate before you just plug a dongle in and go. Make sure that you're taking the right precautions to secure the transaction data at the dongle and after the dongle and out in the wild when it enters the internet. So just ask a few more questions, and that's why I showed that transaction flow. Make sure you understand how that transaction is working its way through the system. And I know that seems like a lot, but since you're responsible for all that transaction data, you definitely want to make sure it's right, that it's secured correctly. Did that make sense, Alex?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
We don't have any other audience questions, so I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Susan.
So Alex, I'll touch on one more thing that I didn't have a slide for. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'll touch on one more thing. Because of this audience and because it's a large ticket, there's a lot of large tickets. I get a lot of questions now about convenience fees, surcharging, and service fees. So while those topics aren't specific to securing your transaction, when we talk about the overall cost of doing business, if you're paying to implement security and some of the aspects I've talked about around securing the transaction, again, remember to ask what else your provider can do for you. That large ticket interchange, convenience fees, surcharges, and service fees are supported in almost every state now. You do have to look at it state by state and what the rules are, but it's a way to recoup some of your interchange costs. So ask about that type of program as well. So I just want to give you every advantage and every reason to take another look at the way you're accepting payments and hopefully save you some money and some headaches. So that was all on that, Alex.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Susan, I always invite people to reach out to me after the fact with feedback or questions. Do you want to give anybody a way to contact you, or do you want to filter all that feedback through me?
Actually, if you go to Get Secure, yeah, I should have mentioned that. Get Secure at Elavon.com. Those questions come into our mailbox, and we've got folks that monitor that daily, so they reach out to me with questions. If they do go to you, Alex, with questions, I'll make sure you have my contact information. Feel free to send them directly to me, no problem.
Sounds great. Well, Susan, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you and all the information. That's all for us. We'll see everybody next time.
All right, thanks for your time. Have a great day.